All right, so thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Dominique and I'm the social worker at Changes Rehab. So today we're going to be talking about the stages of denial. So denial is very complex. It's not really just about saying that, you don't have a problem or just denying, like lying, not accepting something. It's got a lot of different layers, it's got different stages, and it's got different patterns. So it's quite complex. And what we're going to look at today is that we just want to make sure, we're going to run through basically the stages that are present in denial. And then we'll obviously, it'll be nice for you as loved ones or to kind of see maybe where you might be in denial or see where, maybe your loved ones are in denial. So when we look at denial, it displays an important role in addiction when it comes to the addict themselves and their families. Denial is usually a result of ignorance around negative consequences of a person's actions, and this in turn results in an unguided or rational decision making. People are prone to various cognitive biases that have powerful influences on how we make decisions. An example is the confirmation bias causes people to embrace information that confirms their pre-existing narratives. People hold certain beliefs often unconsciously because they attach value to them. So let us take a look at the stages of denial and how this affects the addict or alcoholic as well as their families. So that's just breaking down a bit of a definition as to what denial is. So that it just kind of gives you a bit of an understanding. And now we're going to go into it a little bit deeper. So we look at the definition of denial as presented by the Oxford Languages as follows: the action of denying something, a statement that something is not true, or a refusal of something requested or desired. It is a refusal to acknowledge the reality of one's situation. It is a form of motivated belief or self-deception that detaches an individual from reality. How does this fit into addiction and the family structure? So when we're looking at denial, when it says the action of denying something or the refusal to acknowledge the situation, a lot of addicts or alcoholics will, they'll come into treatment or they'll be forced to come into treatment and they won't have a problem. As we go further, you'll see there's a lot of justification and excuse making, because your addict or alcoholic is trying to create the self-delusion that they don't have a problem, and they're trying to convince themselves that they don't have a problem. It can happen in the family structure as well, where you can sort of look at your loved one and say, but well, where did I go wrong? My child can't be an addict. We're a really good family. We love and support them. So that's kind of what that outright denial is, and also creating a self-delusion or self-deception that everything is okay when it really isn't. People will often do the following in order to maintain a positive view of themselves: revise their beliefs in the face of new evidence of good news, but ignore bad news. Psychological practice such as distraction, forgetfulness, and repression may serve as a variation of denial, and these psychological processes may or may not be conscious processes. So sometimes, when your loved one is in active addiction and they've created this delusion for themselves that everything's okay and they can control their drinking and using, they sometimes don't see the consequences that they are causing to themselves and to other people. So I mean, they might not consciously be aware of what they're actually doing to someone else or to themselves. And that's again where the justification comes in, that everything's okay, I still have a job, everything's fine. So that's just kind of, again, try to convince themselves that they have this under control and that there's no problem. Okay. What we can also say about denial is that it is also known as a defense mechanism. So it means that individuals with substance abuse disorders use denial to prevent threatening emotions entering their conscious thought. So a lot of addicts and alcoholics will use because they can't deal or sit with their emotions that they are currently feeling. And this is due to lacking the capability to cope with negative states, and they will erect powerful defense in a desperate effort to avoid feeling them. So yeah, you'll find that a lot of addicts or alcoholics will use or drink on uncomfortable emotions or emotions that they don't wish to feel. So they're also keeping the uncomfortable feelings of awareness, which results in the development of a false self. And this results in the inability to seek out help. I like to say that when someone believes that they're functional, like I mentioned earlier, they still have a job, the family are still there, they're still getting love and support from everyone around them. Um, it makes them believe that they're functioning and they can control it. So it'll stop people from reaching out and asking for help. They may also have a terrible source of shame, guilt, self-hatred, and low self-worth, and it may be terrifying for the addict to acknowledge the harm that they have caused to themselves and others. Um, sometimes addicts and alcoholics don't want to face the consequences of their addictions. Um, it's too painful for them. So they'll just keep themselves in the same pattern and the same cycle over and over again, not acknowledging that, the only way they're going to stop that harm that they're causing to themselves and everyone else is to get help and get well. The addict or alcoholic often disassociates from self when they are using to numb their emotions or feelings. So there's always, when people are in active addiction, there's always a disconnection. We get a lot of patients that come in that are completely, emotionally disconnected. They are unable to feel emotions, and that forms part of that disassociation. Then we get admitting to the negative consequences requires one to end the behavior, but this may cause pain and distress because of fear. Therefore, denial protects the user from the consequence by denying the reality of the situation, which causes psychological pain and distress. However, the above information can be the same for the loved one or the family members too. So when we talk about that, it's that, your loved one might not want to stop drinking or using because, say, for example, they are dealing with a loss of a family member or a loved one, and they're grieving quite substantially. They don't want to face that, so they believe that the alcohol or the drugs is a better solution to coping with that. Some patients or some users don't want to stop using just purely because they don't want to go through withdrawal, because they know how uncomfortable and horrible it is. And even for the family, they can just, that's where a lot of the codependency and the enabling comes in, because you don't want to cause a rift, you don't want to cause conflict. So you just kind of enable your loved one and keep them from continuing with the addictive behavior, so that they can, so that you don't have to deal with the uncomfortableness that comes with confronting them and trying to get them into treatment, and all of that. Okay, so we're going to look at what some more points for denial is that denial can also be associated with lack of impairment in insight and self-awareness, and this can manifest as denial in the severity of addiction and the need for treatment. People who suffer from addiction may not care for their future and only worry about the current benefits they are experiencing as a result of their substance abuse. They have a tendency to ignore the negative outcomes or consequences of their addictions. Denial is central to the explanation of why addicts persist in using despite the consequences. Denial also alleviates anxiety, and therefore it is important to seek out treatment and admit that they have a problem in order to be taught or given new tools for coping effectively with the pain associated with abstinence. So that's where it kind of forms into that defense mechanism. Sometimes people just don't want to feel the consequences. Sometimes they don't see the consequences. I know a family member and an addict that, this guy kept getting arrested, and the family just kept bailing him out and out and out, because they didn't want to have a negative image placed on their family that, oh, your child is in jail and all of this, so they would enable the loved one. And that's why denial can create this sort of self-illusion that everything is okay, when it's not okay. So we're just going to move into, we've got two different types of denial, and this kind of forms the sort of crux of what denial is. It's defined in two different ways when dealing with substance abuse, and it's known as type A and type B. So when we look at type A denial, it's when the person sees, understands, and knows they have a definite problem, which leads to flat out denying the issue when they are confronted, but they know that it is true. And this is known as outright dishonesty or lying. So your loved one might, or even yourself, so your loved one or yourself might say, okay, you drink a little bit too much, you drink to get blackout drunk, you're not really drinking like a normal person. but they don't want to deny that they're an alcoholic, for example. And the family can be the same, like seeing the same behavior and saying you drink a little bit too much, you black out, you embarrass the family. But it's okay. It only happens every other weekend. So that's essentially when we have type A, is when they can see there's a problem, but they don't want to admit it. And when they're confronted about it, they get very defensive, very irritable. There's mood swings, and it just becomes like a huge confrontation. And then when we look at type B denial, it's when the person is partially or totally blind to the problem. And this is where the rationalization, justification, excuse making comes in, which makes them believe that they do not have a problem, even when everyone else can see it. So this is really outright denial. I'm drinking because it was a friend's birthday. I was depressed, or I had a hard day at work. So there's a lot of justification, there's a lot of rationalization, there's a lot of excuse making, a lot of blaming that happens in type B denial, because they don't want to accept that they have the problem, but it's everyone else around them that is causing them to have the problem. So that's really what type B looks like. Then we get something called intellectual denial, which is usually based on a lack of understanding or indefinition. So a problem in definition could mean that the individual may not see their problem as serious due to stigma or social beliefs, or they may still be functioning, so do not see their problem as serious. We see this quite often, particularly in this country. I mean, we get a lot of patients from developmental areas or townships, that there's no education around substance abuse. There's a lot of gang life there. There's a lot of drug life there. But they don't see it as a problem because it's normal. It's what they grow up around, and it's something that's normal. And then there's also the stigma. I mean, I'm going to use like a CEO of a business as an example, or a lawyer or a doctor that's got an issue, or like a drinking problem or a drug problem, and they don't want to admit it because they don't want people to look at them differently. So unfortunately, we are in 2024. We do still have issues with stigma around addiction. Like a lot of people say that addicts and alcoholics choose to drink, they choose to do drugs, which they do, but they don't choose to become addicted. So they're often looked down upon. And then other addicts or alcoholics might see themselves as functioning. Even you as a family could have that denial around, but the kids still love you, the wife's still with you, you still got a job, you still got your house, you can't really have a problem. And I mean, that's quite common. We get a lot of patients that come into treatment that still have a lot of support and still have a lot of stuff around them, and they still have their jobs, and they haven't had any like real proper consequences on the external side of things. They might have internal consequences, and they still think they're functioning, so there's not really a problem there. So that's what happens with intellectual denial. And then I'll move on to spiritual denial, which is more difficult to deal with. This one is very hard to see. It will lock a person into compliance, blocking any possibility of ongoing sobriety. So basically they become very disconnected, and if they go into treatment just because, they were made to go into treatment, they just tick the boxes. They won't really connect to anything that they've done. They're just, like I mentioned earlier, disconnected from their emotions. So I'll go and do my 21 days and I'll be fine. And then a major goal is to intellectually agree that the problem exists to full acceptance. It can take months, and therefore regular meetings are suggested after treatment so the individual may internalize that acceptance. So essentially what we do in primary care in the first 21, 24 days, however your loved one might be in treatment for, is where we focus on breaking denial. That's all we do in primary care. We get them to internalize the acceptance. I have a problem, connect to their consequences, have a look at how unmanageable their life is. So we're really just touching the surface in primary care. So what we always recommend is, if there is an opportunity for them to do some form of long-term care, whether it's secondary treatment, whether it's a halfway house, we really do encourage it, because the longer you can tie someone to a program of recovery, the better their chances of staying sober. And that's why we always stress, and I mean, if there's no opportunity for any form of extended care, we suggest that they plug into a fellowship or 12-step fellowship. They get to support group meetings like AA or NA. They get a sponsor. They start doing the step work. This is the only way that they're going to stay sober and kind of stay connected into the fact that an internalized acceptance that I'm an addict and I have a problem. So yeah, that's generally why we focus quite substantially on, some form of extended care, or we push them to do a recovery plan so that they are, going to meetings, getting a sponsor, doing their step work, and just continuing with a program of recovery. Okay, so when we get into stages, there's 3 different stages of denial. So when we look at stage 1, it's when a person truly does not believe that they have the disease of addiction. So this is pretty much what we deal with patients that come into primary. Some of you families might have experienced this, where they just outright deny they don't have a problem, or they might accept being addicted to a substance but not accept that they have a disease. That's also, again, on the lack of education that a lot of people have, is that people don't understand that this is a disease. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain that gets triggered when the first drink or drug is picked up. So it is basically a medical condition, and a lot of people don't understand that concept. So they might say that, yes, I have a drug problem, but they don't understand that it's something that requires ongoing treatment. And then they could deny having the problem despite the negative consequences that they incur. So you could throw all consequences at them: car crashes, jail, divorce. It'll always be everybody and everything else's fault. It'll never be their fault. They don't have a problem. So that's pretty much stage 1, where it's just that outright denial that, and it's everybody else's fault but their own. And when we look at overcoming stage 1, what the addict or alcoholic should do is understand addiction through proper education, which will produce intellectual acceptance, which is commonly known as compliance. So that's basically, what we would do in primary care is trying to psychoeducate as much as possible on the disease of addiction, what drugs and alcohol do to your body, how can you work a program of recovery to stay clean and sober. So we do a lot of psychoeducation in primary care. And then the internal acceptance, which requires basic conversion in their belief system. And this is what usually takes the most time. So a lot of people will come in disconnected from their higher power, or from their religion, or whatever the case may be. They might not believe that being an addict is a good thing. So that always takes a lot of time. And what we say is addiction is a behavioral disease. So they can't fix everything in primary care, unfortunately. That's why there has to be some ongoing form of treatment, or some form of ongoing program, just to kind of stay connected so that they can internalize that at some point. And then it's just about saying, I'm an addict, or I'm an alcoholic, so that they can eventually internalize that and accept that on an internal level. Okay, I'm going to move into stage 2. Stage 2 denial is when a person denies the need for ongoing sobriety support after treatment is completed. And this means just because you say you will continue with meetings does not mean you will commit to it. There's no quick fix, and good intentions do not guarantee program action after discharge. So this is where, again, if they haven't kind of internalized or accepted the fact that they have a disease and it requires ongoing treatment, they're not going to be open-minded to extended treatment. They're going to say that they're going to go and do 90 meetings in 90 days, but they're not going to do it when they get out. They're going to just take a break, or, they'll say that they're going to do it, get out, work takes over, and then they just don't have, oh no, my work is so busy, I don't have time to get to a meeting. Some people just come into treatment and think after 21 days they're cured, and there's not going to be any issues thereafter. So yeah, it's very important that if long-term care is recommended, or if we suggest, here's a sponsor's number, please connect with them. It's very important that your loved ones follow through on that. Otherwise, like we always say, don't come home and take a day off after treatment. Get straight into the program, get straight to a meeting, find a sponsor as soon as possible. Because the minute you start taking breaks, the complacency kicks in, and then they're not going to do anything about it. The real change takes place on an internal level and not just with understanding. So when overcoming stage 2, your addict or alcoholic or loved one should require successful transference of dependency from self to a greater power outside of self for the maintaining of ongoing sobriety. And this means that the addict or alcoholic cannot continue to control or run on self-will. Self-will is a very dangerous thing. It's usually what gets them into treatment in the first place, running on their own will, making their own decisions, which are usually impulsive, not taking a step back to think things through. So they really need to maintain some form of ongoing sobriety. And it also usually leads to repeated failure. When they deny that need for going to support group meetings, getting a sponsor, doing step work, they deny the need. There's very high risk that your loved one is going to relapse, because they run on self-will and think, okay, I've got this under control, I'm fine, I don't need to do anything else. And this is easily broken by successful transference of dependency from self to the support of the fellowship, which we normally relate to as step 2. I do a lecture on the steps as well, so there are some family groups that we do, but generally they've just got to they've got to internalize and accept they have a problem and that they can't do this on their own. Recovery cannot be done by itself, unfortunately. That's why we always stress the importance of the fellowship and getting to meetings and starting to work a program of recovery there. Okay, and then we're going to look at stage 3, which is the last stage of denial. It's the need to be willing to go to any length in the recovery process. This is an indicator that the addict or alcoholic has other priorities that are just as or more important than the maintenance of sobriety, which means that their commitment to recovery may be strong, but the maintenance is weak. This is quite common. I'm going to run out there, get guns blazing. I'm going to go to 90 meetings in 90 days, get a sponsor. They'll do it for a couple of months and then they'll take a break. So there's none of that continuous maintenance that happens. And this can escalate in one of 2 directions, where one is to increase commitment and involvement when living problems intensify, and the other is to eventually withdraw completely. So either they'll just stop working a program of recovery and say that they're fine and they don't need to go back, or when things are bad, they'll push the program and then things calm down. Okay, we can take a step back and just manage our own lives again. So yeah, it's very important that they just maintain that consistency in going to meetings and speaking to a sponsor and doing all what is recommended for them to do. Stage 3 usually doesn't last long, and it can be a rejection of the steps. So there's another lecture that I do on dry drunk, where there's a difference between being abstinent and being in recovery. So it's very easy to put the drink and the drugs down, but it's not easy to maintain or stay stopped, if we can call it that. So when overcoming stage 3, the addict or alcoholic should dismantle the constant recommitment to active participation in the recovery fellowship. And that means practicing their 5 pillars. And more activity, the chances are higher. Less activity, the chance of relapse is high. Overcoming the stage is almost impossible, and the addict or alcoholic should strive for progress. So yeah, it just requires continuous ongoing treatment. They cannot recover by themselves. It's not just a case of coming into treatment and then putting the stuff down and detoxing and then you're fine. It's very, very important that your loved ones stay committed to a program of recovery and stay committed to, getting themselves clean and sober, because addiction is not just about the substance, it's a behavioral disease, and they can't fix the behavior by continuously they have to be continuously working on themselves. So just in conclusion, denial has many faces and disguises, and the number one symptom is a denial of its own existence. It keeps people with substance abuse in an everlasting blindness, destroying any chance of a healthy change. It will fight viciously for its survival all the way to insanity, and often results in jails, institutions, or death. It is not threatened by the addict or alcoholic trying to beat it by themselves, as it welcomes this. It does not want for the addict or alcoholic to join others who are dedicated to destroying it. So yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's still 12 patterns of denial that we can also go through in another presentation. But so denial is very complex, and everything that's been said in this presentation can apply to your loved one or even yourselves. sometimes the families can have a bit of denial as well in terms of, or blaming themselves that something went wrong. So yeah, I hope you guys got something out of that. And I think we'll open, unless Emma or anyone wants to add onto that, we can open the floor for questions.
I don't have anything to add. So if there's any questions, then you can either pop it in the chat or you can unmute your mic.
I'm not sure if maybe someone would like to, or possibly even want to share their own experiences. You're welcome to raise your hand or unmute yourself. You as a loved one, you obviously would love to show your support and try and encourage them to, go to their meetings, speak to their sponsor. But on the other hand, their recovery is their responsibility. You can't run after them every 5 minutes. So what happens in those situations is I usually, say to families, then set some firm boundaries that, if you're not going to do this and you relapse, then XYZ is going to happen. Or, we're gonna put these consequences in place. Because like I say, I mean, for you as a loved one, it's quite exhausting running after them every 5 minutes saying, have you gone to a meeting? Why haven't you gone to, you know, why haven't you seen your sponsor? Why, what, you haven't been to a meeting in 2 weeks? Like, what's happening? So I mean, you can always ask, like, what is going on for them? Why, why have they not been to meetings, and try and be as supportive as possible. But on the other hand, you don't want to run after them either, because that is going to exhaust you as well. And then, rather set some boundaries and put some consequences in place should they relapse, then this is going to happen. Emma, I don't know if you want to add on to that.
Yeah, so I agree with you. It's not our responsibility to make sure that our loved ones go to meetings and work their recovery. What we can do is point out behaviors that we see. So we can point out if we're seeing that they're not going to their meetings, they're not, doing the things that they said they were supposed to be doing. And like Dominique said, putting boundaries in place, but it's not really the responsibility of a loved one to try and persuade somebody to go to a meeting. So yeah, like I said, pointing out behaviors, putting boundaries in place, and just expressing your concern, I think is all we can do as a loved one. And asking them if they need support, if they need help, if they're struggling, and offering that support then. But yeah, it's not our responsibility to try and make them go to meetings.
There is a question: what is advisable, 21 days or 3 months at a rehab, and what is this based on? So that is, it's dependent on each person's process, and obviously the situations they find themselves in. Unfortunately, in South Africa, they only medical aid will only cover at least 21 or 24 days treatment, and thereafter, most treatment facilities are cash. But I personally always recommend at least 3 months of treatment, yes, if you can, and it is doable. And obviously based on the progress of your loved one, that it would be up to them, so if they do well in 3 months, then great. If not, they might need some extra time. So it's purely dependent on a case by case basis. But I personally think that if you can keep your loved one in treatment for a minimum of 3 months, it would be best for them, because as I said earlier, the longer you tie them to recovery, the better their chances are. It's a normal process for a lot of people and a lot of families to go through, is just having that denial. There's, especially if I don't want to say a lack of education, but especially, like you say, it's the first time you're kind of going through something like this, and you're not 100% sure how addiction works. It can be very taxing, and can be very draining, and it can be very emotional. And I think that's why these family groups are so important, because we try and psychoeducate as much as possible, just so that you as family and loved ones are also more equipped to kind of deal with your loved ones when they do eventually come home. So yeah, thanks for that. Emma, I don't know if you want to add anything before I move to Stanley's question.
No, I think what Chantal was saying is very valuable, and I think that's why these groups are so important, is because a lot of the times we can feel very alone in this kind of process, and sometimes it feels like a shameful thing that we have to keep to ourselves. And using a platform like this is really important and really beneficial to the loved ones as well. To share your experiences and learn from one another. Sorry for my cat. A great example is how Greg was able to share his experience and what worked with him. So, welcome, Chantal, and we're glad to have you.
Okay, Stanley's asked, our loved one lives alone and has come out of rehab about a month ago. As we are quite far away, please advise what he or she must do to avoid having a relapse, and being so far away, how can we assist? So I think just in terms of, your loved one, as I mentioned, they really need to get to support meetings, whether it's AA, whether it's NA, whether it's CA, just 12-step fellowship meetings, get connected into a fellowship. The suggestion is usually to do 90 meetings in 90 days. So one meeting a day, every day for 90 days. Get a sponsor as soon as possible, get step work going as soon as possible. And I think it is a bit of a difficult one with you guys living quite far away from your loved one, but I would encourage maybe regular contact just to check in. How are you doing? What's happening for you? Because I think, yeah, again, their recovery is their responsibility, but the only way that they're going to avoid a relapse is by staying connected to the fellowship and staying connected to the program. Like in the primary care, that's where we break the denial, we get them to connect to their consequences. And then what happens is they'll move into secondary, where they start working on the behaviors that they've identified in primary care, and then move on to tertiary, which is our halfway house, which reintegrates them back into life. And I think it just gives them that nice kind of flow between inpatient and going home, because like sometimes when someone's locked in an inpatient facility for a while and they come home, it can be very overwhelming. So yeah, it's nice to have that kind of phase through structure, if it is possible. I think Dr. Tears just added onto that chat as well. If you guys want to just have a look, it says United Nations Drug and Crime Units research published by them, and book Inside Rehab, as well as Oxford textbook of psychiatry. And then there was new research published on Medscape. Yeah, look, I think it is a very difficult one because, like you say, it is your child, and it's really difficult to kind of, set those boundaries. But sometimes that tough love, as hard as it is the only way that they're going to learn and get better. And I think that's why it's so important for you guys to attend family support groups or any other support groups. We do have some resources for other groups as well. If you would like those, you can just have a chat with your son's counselor. But yeah, the support groups are really, really important. And as hard as that tough love is, it's sometimes the only way that you can help them. Because sometimes they've got to really fall hard to realize that they actually can't keep carrying on. And I think for you as a family as well, if you keep letting them in the house and they keep using drugs and they keep drinking and they keep creating chaos, it's not very comfortable for you either as a family, to have to deal with that all the time. So yeah, we really do encourage as much family support as possible.